All right, so let's continue along and let's finish up with this chapter 4 module about membranes. So, membranes are thin sheets of one or more tissues. They line body surfaces or body cavities. Most consist of an epithelial layer. Of course, that would be a layer of epithelial tissue resting on a connective tissue layer. Sometimes that connective tissue layer will contain smooth muscle depending on the type of membrane we're dealing with. The function of a membrane is to anchor organs in place, to serve as a barrier to prevent things from entering or exiting. They play a role in immunity, and they secrete various substances, and we'll talk about some of those here in just a moment. The true membranes are the serous and the synovial membranes. Whoops, sorry about that. Serous membranes are going to be associated with body organs. Synovial membranes are going to be associated with joints. These fit above structural and definitional definitions, or fit the above structural and functional definitions, structure and function. Membrane-like structures, the mucous and cutaneous membranes, don't fit the structure and function definitions, but they perform many of the same functions. Cutaneous membrane is your skin, which we'll talk about in the next chapter. Mucous membranes are going to be those membranes like the ones that line the inside of your mouth, the undersides of your eyelids, inside your nose, and places like that. True membranes do not open to the outside of the body. Two examples, the serous membranes, like the pericardial, peritoneal, pleural. Again, those all are associated with body organs, the heart, the organs of the intestinal system and that area, lungs. These consist of a mesothelium, which is a thin layer of squamous epithelium, an associated basement membrane, and a layer of connective tissue. This is usually what we look at when you're in the lab looking at slides of various tissues, and you're looking at simple squamous epithelium. You are looking at a mesothelium layer of some organ, usually. Serous membranes, or serosa, these fold over themselves. They have the appearance of being two layers. There's an outer parietal layer, which lines the body wall, an inner visceral layer, which covers the organ. These cells produce a serous fluid that is associated with these two layers. The fluid fills the space between the parietal and visceral layers, reduces friction, and that is very beneficial because all of these organs, whether you're talking about your heart, your lungs, or your abdominal organs, they all have to move, and that fluid sort of acts like the lubricant that lets those two layers slide easily across each other. There's an example of the true membrane. Here is the area right here we're going to see blown up. So you've got the serous fluid in here. There's the thin layer of the simple squamous epithelium there, the underlying basement layer, the loose connective tissue. This would be the parietal layer. This would be the visceral layer. So this is the area out near the lungs. You can see the sort of the lung tissue there, or excuse me, the ribs. And then here is the rest of the body, of the inner layer of the membrane. True membranes continue, the synovial membranes. These are the ones that lie surrounding the freely movable joints, such as the knee and shoulder. Again, you're going to have an outer layer, which is normally composed of loose and dense, irregular connective tissue. And you have an inner layer, which secretes the synovial fluid. Again, that's the stuff that's, again, lubricates the joints, keeps the joints moving smoothly. And one of the problems as we age and we start to suffer things like osteoarthritis, one of the things that happens is this inner layer becomes frayed, doesn't produce sufficient amounts of this slippery liquid, and our joints begin to become irritated. They hurt when we move, and it can even cause inflammation, and eventually that inflammation can lead to bone deterioration and other issues as well, which we will talk about later on in the semester. And then there is a picture of a cross section of a true membrane of the joint, and that just happens to be the knee. The cutaneous membranes and mucous membranes. The mucous membranes line all passages that are open to the outside of the body. So the respiratory passages, the mouth, the nasal cavity, the digestive tract, the male and female reproductive organs, even though many of these things are found inside the body, they are technically open to the outside. Now, don't get lost here when we were talking about the lungs having a serous and a visceral layer, the parietal and visceral layers, excuse me. But now we are talking about the respiratory passages, the trachea, the bronchial tubes, and all of those things. These membranes are going to be made up of a layer of epithelium and a basement membrane that is a connective tissue. And occasionally there will be some thin muscle depending on the area we're talking about. They're also going to contain those cells which we talked about earlier called goblet cells. The function of the goblet cells is to produce and secrete the mucus that serves several functions. Again, primarily protection, keeps things from getting into areas where we don't want them. And again, there is a cross section. Again, we showed you the picture of the lung where we showed you the visceral and parietal pleura. Here we are talking about the lining of the actual trachea, right there where the trachea and that bronchial tube comes off. Here you see the basement membrane. Here's the pseudostratified columnar epithelium. Here's the goblet cell making the secretion, and there's the cilia. The cutaneous membrane refers to the skin. Trivia question that comes up every once in a while: what is the largest organ in the body? The largest organ in the body is your skin. You have an outer keratinized stratified squamous epithelium. That's the epidermis. That's the stuff you touch on the outside. It's tough, has a continuous protective surface, protects structures deep to it. The dermis is a layer of loose connective tissue beneath the epidermis, plus the deeper layer of dense, irregular tissue. This is where we find the blood vessels. This is how oxygen and nutrients diffuse into the avascular epidermis. So the dermis has blood vessels. The epidermis, wherever it is right here, does not. Again, the epidermis is avascular, no vessels, but it is innervated. It has nerves. That's why paper cut hurts, but they generally don't bleed. And there's the cutaneous membrane again showing the keratinized layer on the outside, right here, and then the dermis. And this is, you actually get to what was referred to as the hypodermis, which we'll talk about in the next chapter. Friction rubs, inflammation of the pleural or pericardial cavities may result from viral or bacterial infection. Serous fluid secreted for lubrication becomes inadequate to reduce friction. The layers rub together as organs contract and expand. Friction rubs result in a grating sound. It can be heard with the stethoscope. One of the things the doctor's looking for when he's got his stethoscope on your back and asking you to deep breath in, deep breath out, he's listening for friction rubs. He can listen for other things as well, but that's one of the things he listens for. If you suffer from friction rubs, you will have chest pain. It will worsen with inhalation, body movement and swallowing, and it is usually resolved by treatment of the underlying condition, which is most often viral or bacterial in nature. All right, so we've got tissues. Tissues gets damaged. What do? We have tissue repair. There's two forms of tissue repair. This is what is referred to as wound healing. Dead and damaged cells are removed and replaced with new cells or tissues. The gaps created by this dead and damaged cells are filled to maintain homeostasis. The process will differ depending on the type of tissue damage. Some tissues are capable of what is referred to as regeneration, where the dead and damaged cells are replaced with the same type of cells. When this process is finished, tissue returns to the normal functional level. So here we have an example of a cut of some sort, a laceration. The injured areas, damaged, dead, and epithelial cells. The same type of cells are going to replace. So we have new epithelial cells. This is the regeneration process. This is the type of damage where you get a cut and 2 weeks later, you can't find where the cut was anymore because the repair is nearly perfect. The dead and dying epithelial cells are replaced with the same types of cells, regeneration. Other tissues are not capable of full regeneration. In that case, cells called fibroblasts will fill the gaps left by the injury. This is a process called fibrosis. The end result of fibrosis is the development of scar tissue. The fibroblasts will divide by mitosis. They will produce collagen that fills the gaps. The tissues will lose some functional ability. The end result of fibrosis is the development, again, of scar tissue. Scar tissue is primarily dense, irregular connective tissue. Later on in the next chapter or so, we will talk about burns. And one of the reasons that burns of the hands are so serious is because if burns are severe enough, burns cannot be fixed this way. Burns have to be fixed this way, resulting in scar tissue. And the hands are going to lose some of their flexibility and some of their fine motor skills. So the end result of fibrosis, scar tissue. So fibrosis is what we refer to as development of a scar. You have a cut or a laceration, and you'll see it goes very deep into the tissue. We're down into the, this is actually showing cardiac tissue, but we're down in deep into the muscle layer here. That is going to be replaced by, collagen fibers. We're going to have a very, very noticeable repair. Everybody has seen a scar, and that is what happens when this damage is severe and cannot be repaired. The capacity of tissue to repair itself is largely dependent on the cell's ability to undergo mitosis. So epithelial tissues typically undergo regeneration. So the skin and the lining of the digestive tract are subjected to great deals of stress, but they have a mechanism for replacing dead, damaged, and worn out cells. The new cells are derived from stem cells, and they are capable of mitosis. So they replicate themselves very easily. Other epithelial tissues have mature cells in the vicinity of the injury, are capable of replacing dead and dying cells by dividing. So again, these types of cells will undergo regeneration. Connective tissue also can heal by regeneration, most connective tissues. The exception is cartilage. Cartilage cells have a limited regeneration ability. Most cartilage repair is done through the production of, again, fibrosis or scar tissue. Connective tissue proper, such as bone, or connective tissue propers, bone, and blood regenerate easily through division of resident immature cells. So again, most connective tissues are going to heal by regeneration, the exception being cartilage. Smooth muscle tissue usually regenerates. Cardiac and skeletal muscle tissues tend to heal by fibrosis. So when it comes to muscle tissue, the smooth undergoes regeneration. Cardiac and skeletal muscle reproduces and produces scar tissue. Satellite cells in the skeletal muscle, we'll talk about those when we get to the chapter on the muscle tissue and the muscle system a little later. But they do divide and mature into skeletal muscle cells, providing limited degree of regeneration. There are no satellite cells associated with cardiac muscle, and all injuries to the heart muscle are healed by fibrosis. Nervous tissue generally undergoes fibrosis or scar tissue formation. Neurons do not have the ability to divide by mitosis, therefore they are incapable of regeneration. That's why nerve damage is so serious, because we have no capability of making new cells. Neuroglial cells, on the other hand, do retain the ability to divide by mitosis and replace the dead and damaged neurons with scar tissue. The axons of neurons outside the brain and spinal cord can regenerate given the right conditions. So if you have nerve damage, say in an elbow following a, you have a motorcycle wreck, you break your elbow pretty badly, you lose some sensation in your fingers, maybe some fine motor skills in your fingers due to nerve damage. In certain instances, in the right conditions, those neurons can regenerate, and over time you can get some of that fine motor skills back. Some other factors that affect tissue repair. Tissue repair involves the production of large quantities of proteins, which requires adequate supply of amino acids, which means your diet needs to be proper. If you've got damage, you need to make you're sure that your diet contains the proper types of proteins, because that's where we get our amino acids from. Vitamin C is required by fibroblasts to produce functional collagen, so you want to make sure you're drinking plenty of orange juice or other sources of vitamin C. And the blood supply to the injured region must be adequate to deliver oxygen, nutrients, and cells. So that's the reason people with diseases of the arteries often have non-healing wounds. That's also one of the reasons that people with diabetes are slow healers, is because the oxygen transport and the blood system transport through those extremities is sometimes not as good as it should be. All right. Well, that's going to wrap up chapter 4. We're going to pick up. I will start again here in just a minute. Sorry, I'm scratching my nose. My nose is itching like crazy for some reason this morning. But I will start up in a chapter 5 and do a little 30 or 35 minute introduction to chapter 5, and then we will pick up with that on Monday morning. See ya. Have a good weekend.